Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming. So yes, I'm Sarah. I'm the founder and director of First Crate, and yeah, today I'm going to be talking through the digital PR process kind of from start to finish, but also basically strategies for success and creativity on a budget. So yeah, a little bit about me. I started out in traditional PR about 6 years ago now in Singapore, and I used to work with like fashion and food and beverage brands. About 6 years ago I moved to the UK with my family, and I've been working in digital PR ever since. Actually I started at Hallam, so full circle. In my last role I was actually the head of creative at Kaizen, which is an agency based in London, and I've worked with some of the biggest brands across Europe. One of my highlights of my career was in 2021 I launched a report which looked at proving the value of no-follow links, which basically what I did was I bought two different websites with very similar domain names, built follow links to one and no-follow links to the other, and kind of tracked kind of how they ranked over time. And actually what happened was the no-follow link site actually ranked quite well, so it basically proved that no-follow links do have value, and it's now, I guess, a bit more accountable in the industry. So yeah, back in January of this year, I just launched my first brand, First Crate, a digital PR freelance agency based in London. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking through kind of the process behind running successful digital PR campaigns. This is just based off my own kind of experience over the last couple of years, and I'll be doing like a whistle-stop tour, so apologies if I go quite quickly. So initially I'm going to be talking through how to nail PR ideation. That's like my bread and butter. You know, you have to do that in order to make sure you have a good digital PR campaign. So I'll walk through kind of how to come up with ideas that align, one, with your brand, but also purposefully. Number two, I'll also be going through outreach strategy. So basically how to run a successful outreach strategy plan and make sure that you're kind of thinking about key angles and hooks before launch. And the last thing I'll be running through is kind of how to successfully report on your campaigns, aside from just number of links, coverage, and that kind of thing. So yeah, initially nailing ideation. I'll talk through how to write an ideation brief, how to kind of prepare attendees, and hopefully you run ideations in a group setting. And then also I'll go through how to diversify tactics. So ideations can sometimes be boring because it's like forced creativity and you really have to engage everyone. So I'll talk through different ways in kind of getting creativity up in a team. And lastly, I'll talk about my 10 creative commandments, which I've kind of developed over a long time now, which I use to kind of scope out ideas to make sure that they're going to work for the brand and for the news. So I really like this quote by Einstein: creativity is intelligence having fun. I've met so many people that think that they're not creative and that it's something that you're born with, which is such a misconception. Creativity is definitely all about just data and making sure that you're looking at the data, making sure you're applying it in an interesting way, right? So I'll talk through a few vital questions you need to ask yourself before you run an ideation. This is the steps that I do, and that really helps me with coming up with the best ideas. So number one, a very obvious one, what is our business model? So looking at kind of how do we generate revenue? How do we generate leads? How can we apply that to PR and make sure that we're thinking about that at the forefront of our strategy? And also, do you have a company mission and vision? Those types of sentences really help you think about ways to kind of come up with ideas as well. Who is our target audience? So not just in the sense of they're women or they're Gen Z or millennial, whatever, but what kind of publications are they reading and what are they searching for to find your brand? So whether that be awareness keywords or research keywords, what kind of questions are they asking? Number three, who are our competitors? So we always think about competitors in both the SEO sense and the traditional sense. So direct competitors, but also making sure that you're searching for keywords, making a big list of competitors that kind of show up on the SERPs that you want to be competing with. Number four, looking at kind of what are our key products and services. So depending on the kind of stuff that you sell, you need to be thinking about the kind of keywords you want to be targeting from the get-go. That's really important to then measure your impact later on. So making sure you're thinking about the keywords and products and services you're wanting to look at in your kind of PR ideas. Number five, what is our tone of voice? So depending on the industry that you work in, depending on how fun or how serious you need to be, that's obviously important to highlight, kind of set parameters for the team when you're running that ideation as well. so what reputation / news is there about our company currently? So I like to think about this in terms of like, can you use anyone internally in your company to leverage comments, like expert commentary that you can use to kind of help the reputation of your brand? I always suggest doing this and making sure you can also try and use external experts as well. Journalists love that because it becomes a bit more editorial when you're not just talking about one brand. Number 7, what questions are our target audience asking? So obviously we all know like answer the public, but you know, Google's people ask section is always like quite useful as well. Just make sure that you're kind of aware of like what questions your audience are asking basically, and there's ways to look at that quite easily on Google. And then what are competitors doing in terms of PR? So make sure you're actually like linking to examples for your attendees to look at as well. So look at like, yeah, basically like what kind of like campaigns are they running and what have they done recently? Is there anything that you can take from what's been done before and make it better? So that's important. 9, what kind of publications should we be targeting? So based on running a link gap analysis. So for those who don't know, basically it's just figuring out what kind of links your competitors have that you don't have. There's a way to do that on Ahrefs, but there's also ways to do it manually where you can just find out looking at like publications that your competitors have links on and then trying to come up with ideas that directly target those publications. That's another way of coming up with ideas. And 10, so what kind of campaign inspiration can we take from similar campaigns done in the PR space? So depending on your industry, you may have obviously direct competitors that you want to be monitoring what they're doing in terms of PR, but ultimately like make sure you're looking at all industries. Like there's lots of information on Twitter, like digital PR, like newsletters and like different accounts that you can be following, but that really helps in terms of measuring trends and kind of mimicking methodologies that you can also be using in your campaigns. And lastly, like what kind of content have we created in the past? So is there any like internal data you can use? Are you happy to share sales data? That kind of thing. And also, can you use any like blog content that you've written in the past that may be like listicle or reactive type format? And there's probably a lot of it that could be outreached already. So make sure you're thinking about what you have already. So yeah, that's obviously a lot to go through, and like that's what I like to make sure I ask myself before I do an ideation, because ultimately when you pull an ideation brief together, you're already coming up with ideas as you pull it, and I've put a template there as well. So I actually ran a survey last year to my team on ideations, and actually only 1 in 10 of us feel the most creative during an ideation session. So it's really hard, like I said, to like force creativity, right? Like nobody likes to show up and then like just be forced to come up with ideas. So it's a lot. I've actually got a few other ways to do it. 70% of us say they actually feel the most creative outside, like in the environments. Obviously in the summer it's easy to do ideations outside, but this is not something I'd expect all year round. 30% of us actually feel the most creative when we're like taking a break or when we're playing on the internet or like when we're out with friends. And I'm not saying obviously like come up with ideas when you're out with your friends, but make sure that you think about like, how does your team feel the most creative? Can you come up with ideas prior to ideations as a team perhaps, to then come to the table with ideas already? It's just kind of being mindful about how to keep creativity up, and everyone's different in terms of how they like to ideate. So yeah, with that in mind, I'll go through a few examples of like ideation tactics that I like to use and like different ways to do it. So that's a really blurry screenshot, but that's Miro board. I don't know if it's probably more like the more known one. It's a collaborative mind map type tool that you can use virtually, remotely with your team in an office. And basically at the end of the sessions, I always like to include like little emojis, if you can see there, to like kind of scope out the ideas. Have a session at the end with your team where you're like, what were our top favorite ideas? And make sure you're asking them that, because depending on the number of people you have, that can really help with scoping the ideas out later on. Metro Retro is another one. These are all free tools. So Metro Retro, very similar, but it's like Notepad, sticky pad version. And you used to be able to vote, but now I think you have to pay for it. So I would suggest, again, using like emojis to kind of scope out the ideas that you like the most. I actually made this template like 2 years ago. And it's basically every color is a person, and you're allocated a color. And then at the end of it, when you've written all your ideas, everyone can vote in their colored box. But the caveat is nobody can see your votes, because what tends to happen in ideations is when you vote for things, you're just voting for what your manager votes for, or you're just voting for what your friend votes for. So this is a good way to anonymize it and basically get the best ideas at the end of it, where you're not just voting for the sake of like, that has 7 votes, so I'll vote for that one. So yeah, now kind of moving on to like scoping out ideas. Here are like my 10 creative PR commandments that I've like used over the last kind of 6 years. So the most important rule for me is like you have to have full confidence that the story that you come up with will work. And if you don't have that confidence going into it, it probably won't. The caveat to that as well is you can't, one thing that I always see that happens in the industry is you pass off ideas because you don't like it or you don't think it's going to work. But actually what you really need to be doing is if you don't like an idea, you have to question why. Is it from like a bias? Do you not like that because that's just your own kind of opinion? But actually you really have to be looking into ways to prove it from a data perspective. Look at the news, look at BuzzSumo or any kind of tools that you may have access to really see if, you know, you are right. Because a lot of the times I think we become attached to an idea because we really like that. We're like really personally interested in it. So just one thing to think about really. Secondly, an obvious one, the story has to be on brand and relevant to your target audience. Pretty straightforward. The story has to have evergreen potential. So for example, if you're coming up with a story around Father's Day or Mental Health Awareness Week or whatever it may be, make sure you've got angles that you can go out with afterwards, because obviously then you don't have to limit your outreach potential. 4, the story should leverage an expert. I think it always should leverage an expert. Make sure you're using internal spokespeople to add commentary, and also use external spokespeople when you think it's relevant. Number 5, if the story makes use of published data, it has to be analyzed in a way that offers a new story. So we all have access to Statista, ONS, Numio, whatever the sources may be. You have to make sure that if it's been done before, and mostly it has, like all the stories have been done in some way or form. So you have to make sure of like, how are you going to add something new to it that's actually going to be interesting. 6, the story has to trigger an emotion. And I always think this is a nice way to test an idea. Like if you don't feel anything, or you don't like laugh, or you don't like or feel sad or angry or something, you probably won't make other people feel anything as well. So it's important to like have a conversation with as many people as possible when you're coming up with an idea. Like ask your friends, colleagues, you know, your mum, whatever, but just make sure you're kind of asking a lot of people. The visuals also have to be the simplest way of kind of portraying the data. I mean, journalists are basically like goldfish, like they have 5 seconds and they're just scrolling through your on-site copy. If your data or your graphic doesn't immediately tell them what the graph is, they're probably not going to be as interested. So just include as little words as possible. Make sure it's very clear if it's like a map, for example. 8, even if you're a UK brand, getting international links is very powerful, especially if you're wanting to build like niche links that are like for a specific industry. By, you know, outreaching internationally and making like having global stories like global indexes and city indexes and that kind of thing, you can really like broaden your outreach potential and gain a lot more links as well. Number 9, the story has to offer a unique perspective, and that differentiates it from previous coverage. So like I said, everything's been done in some way or form in terms of every story, but make sure that you're thinking about like what's your unique take on the story, like what hasn't been done before or talked about, and make sure you're kind of being a bit unique with it. And the last one, which is probably one of the most important ones, is the story has to be a hot topic that people are talking about right now. If people aren't, you know, if journalists aren't talking about it, that just tells you that it's probably not going to work, right? So yeah, those kind of 10 rules have like formed my like way of thinking when it comes to ideas, and it's allowed me to get coverage like this. So on like Forbes, Lonely Planet, blah, blah, blah. So now moving into outreach. So I'll kind of walk through about how to prolong outreach, because I think outreach is obviously the most important step, right? So ideation is very important. You need to make sure you've got a good idea, but ultimately there's no digital PR without outreach, right? So initially, so what is an outreach strategy? I like to think of it as a document that you prepare at least a week in advance of launching a campaign that basically outlines all of the key angles ahead of time. When do you create one? A week before it goes live. So what's included? Number 1, obviously the angle. So you've always got to think about the different kinds of angles for a story. If you've only got one angle, it's not going to be very good in terms of outreach potential. So for example, like a personal finance angle. What is the story? So that will be a sentence that's like, this angle will reveal X. What's the resonance? So what leads us to believe that this is actually interesting? So make sure you're questioning it when you're writing your angle down, like, why will anybody care about this angle? 4, how relevant is it? So like, how does it fit in with our customers, our brand? How does it fit in with the news? Make sure you're questioning that. And number 5, the sell-in. So for every angle I come up with, I always come up with 3 headlines and at least three target publishers that I'm thinking about as well. So for example, like new study reveals or X crowned most X or whatever those headlines may be, make sure to think about at least 3. And then the data. So what research or data points will you use to kind of support that angle? So that's really blurry, but that's kind of what the outreach strategy document looks like. So for every row, there is another angle. So you can this is like a nice document I like to do to fill out, because sometimes when you're writing an angle, you're like, actually, no, that's not that interesting. Cool. And then now going on to measuring impact. So hopefully now you've come up with a great idea. You've come up with, you're starting to outreach it. So I'll run through a few examples of like how to kind of smartly kind of show ROI when it comes to links and not just showing the number of pieces of coverage, for example. Aside from the basic number of links. So this is an example where it showcases like on the left here you can see like competitors, and basically it's a rainbow graph where the darker the color, the more spammy, I guess the link would be. The lighter the color, the higher the domain rating. So this is a nice way to showcase like how, clients can be kind of, you can showcase their kind of like rainbow of like domain ratings, if that makes sense. And then on the right side, you've got all the links that you've built in a period of time. So for example, if you were reporting on like a quarterly basis, you can showcase all the links you've built and how you've positively like attributed links to those link profiles in comparison to competitors. So I like to use this graph because it's kind of like an easy way to see it visually. Number 2, so here's another example where you showcase like the number of referring domains on the left in a bar graph and the domain rating in the line graph. So it kind of just shows like how you can kind of compare, you could do this over time or you could do this for a specific period to showcase, but it shows like the correlation between domain rating and like the number of links as well, which not always has a correlation, but it's a good way to kind of showcase that. And like I mentioned before, obviously having being keyword focused in your when you're coming up with ideas is super important, because ultimately you can then report that back when you're kind of looking at the impact that your kind of campaign has had. So for example, like including internal links in your on-site copy, building links to the blog page, you can then kind of track how those keywords have performed over time. So make sure that you're doing that. So looking at like how keyword, obviously, these are not just influenced just by links, and I think we all know that, but it is a good indicator to showcase like how keyword visibility has changed over time and how it's maybe perhaps gone up since you've launched the campaign. So make sure you're reporting on those kind of percentages. And then the last one here we've got where it kind of looks at like referring domain growth. So looking at if you were to report, for example, from the beginning of Q2 to the end of Q2, and you want to showcase like link velocity in an easy way to showcase like how many links you've built in comparison to competitors, you can this is just an easy way of doing it, where you just get the number of links before and post quarter, and make sure that you're kind of reporting that to showcase like the level of activity that you've been doing to stakeholders or to your boss or whoever. So yeah, hopefully that has provided, that was quite a lot, and I know like I've ran through that really quickly, but that's sort of like 6 years of a career like into like 20 minutes. So hopefully you can kind of implement some of those like tips within your own strategies. And yeah, I'll just run through a few key takeaways from today. So number 1, make sure that you're using a variety of data to create your pre-ideation briefs. Make sure you're creating pre-ideation briefs. They're immensely helpful, and it's worth the time to put into it because you will get better ideas. Number 2, make sure you're diversifying your ideation tactics. So think about how you're running ideations currently, if you are or if you aren't. If you're just doing it solo, make sure to try and involve other people where possible. Number 2, make sure to utilize an outreach strategy document. So make sure you plan ahead, because that will save you loads of time later down the line when you're like, okay, what other angle can I do now? You've already got that plan for a long period of time. And the last one, make sure that you're representing results smartly. I like to avoid just showing like an Excel sheet with like all my links on it. Make sure you're thinking a bit more in terms of how that is actually impacting, the bottom end. So I've put links here to all the different templates that I've included in this, and I'll share it around after the talk. But yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, my Twitter is Sarah Fleming PR, and you can email me there. Thank you.